is the money worth it? Because you're printing for pennies, right? Like, say what it is.
I haven't got paid yet, so
there's no profit. Okay, yeah, we need money down. That doesn't work in hot market printing. Welcome to the big leagues. Okay, so you don't get
it's
paid
not
up
for
front.
the money.
It's not for the money.
Hey, Printouts, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Bruce from Printavo. We've got Mr. Steven Farrig out of Campus Inc. Super excited there. We've got a pretty cool episode. A shop owner who's gone from algebra teacher to successful shop, and some things he's learned along the way, and also how he got some bigger Warriors contracts, which, big question, was it profitable? We'll see real quick here soon, right after our sponsors. All right. First up, Multicraft. Have you heard of Multicraft Daddy? Have you heard of Multicraft Daddy, Farrig?
I have. I might know Dave Eggers.
Dave Eggers is at 421 followers on Instagram.
He's doing great.
Which is great.
I'm really proud of him.
Thank you, David. Oh, 422. Just changed. If you need ink, supplies, or Daddy, Multicraft screen printing and digital supplies for over 50 years have been providing you with top brands at competitive pricing. Make sure to mention Printavo Podcast so you can get an extra 10% off your first order. Farrig, you guys order a ton from Multicraft as well.
Yep.
So thank you, Multicraft. Second up.
Supacolor is the world's best heat transfer made by screen printers for screen printers. Rum and the team at Supacolor understand firsthand exactly the pressures and expectations of the screen printing business. Rum came from the industry, and that's why they pride themselves on being super fast and super easy. I can't tell you how many times Supacolor has just bailed us out. They ship within a couple of days. The quality is incredible. They hit all of their colors, and they have drastically transformed our business. Experience them for yourself using promo code Printavo15 and get 15% off. All right, Easy Way.
Easy Way. You shouldn't be spending all day cleaning dirty screens. Easy Way's line of environmentally conscious chemicals get the job done faster, more efficiently, and cost you a fraction of the cost per screen. Easy Way. Check them out. Buy them at your distribution or direct or whatever. They're great. And last but not least,
1-900-HOT-STUFF.
1-900-HOT-STUFF. Ta-ding!
1-900-HOT-STUFF.com. If you need a solution to improve efficiency, reduce costs in your art department, call 1-900-HOT-STUFF.com. Actually, the team at Graphic Source offers industry-leading outsource options for your shop by truly becoming part of your team. Lucas and good old Nick Wood and the team at Graphics are fantastic. So SEPs, mockups, creative, order management, embroidery, digitizing, back office admin. They have 30 years in the game, and they know and understand shop needs and have a proven track record. Hit up graphicsource.com and mention the Printavo podcast for 50% off your first vector, separation, or embroidery order. Thanks, guys.
What's up, Jeremy?
What's going on, Bruce?
Jeremy, Steven, got introed to me from James, who's our new CEO of Printavo and Inksoft. And James has been in the tech industry for a while, so I'm kind of curious how you, Jeremy, and James met.
So we went to the same college at different times. So we're both products of Occidental College, a little liberal arts school in Los Angeles. And it's a small school, 1,600 students. So not, it's a place where essentially if you know one person, you know everybody.
Yeah.
And so James was introduced to me through a mutual friend just recently. He's like, hey, Jeremy, my friend Doug, who, he's a sort of former Google guy and kind of went through all the tech world stuff. He's like, hey, Jeremy, you got to meet James. He's the CEO of a company called Printavo. And I'm like, Printavo? Get out of here. Wait, what happened to Bruce? I was like I was a little confused. So I ended up reaching out to James, and that's when I kind of caught up on a little bit of the interesting things that you guys have going on from a a big picture industry standpoint with the consolidation and all that type of stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
Jeremy, how did you know about Bruce? How did you know about Bruce from before that? Was it just like from trade shows, or like how did you know about Printavo? Like when those worlds collided?
No?
Say it again.
Do you use Printavo? You don't.
Oh yeah.
It's okay if you know. Oh, okay, cool.
No. Oh yeah. No, I think when I spoke to James, he did a little bit of sleuthing and dug into our account, and I'm not sure what number we are, but we are an early adopter of Printavo. So
really,
probably.
Give me a check real quick.
Yeah, go for it. Please take a look, because I have no idea what the number is, but it was pretty early, I think. I would say
2016.
2016. So I'm not sure how far along that was in your journey, but
no, I'm sorry, 2015. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
Wow.
Jeremy, 2015 right there. I don't think I was full time. I was full time in 2017, maybe.
Yeah, you were doing everything yourself.
Funny story. We would, because Bruce and I met just on Facebook, because I don't know why, but Bruce would go on his lunch breaks to Portillo's, and that's when we would meet up and talk about Printavo.
Allegedly,
and I was like, "Wait, you don't do this full time?" He's like, "No, I got to get back to work."
Oh my gosh, you don't know a funny story about that, and I think I can tell it now. It's fine, but. So one time I was at work, like I was doing UI design and stuff at this startup. And I would usually it's just like wait until emails come across, or if like you're sitting in the bathroom, you're either scrolling through Instagram or you're on emails or whatever. Yeah, it's like good checkup time, right? It's quiet. And so I got a call from a random number, which I used Google Voice back then, and the first ring, it's probably spam, right? The second ring comes in and I'm like, oh shoot, it's from the same number. So obviously, something's not right if somebody calls twice.
Yeah.
So I don't answer because I'm like walking back in. The third time calls again. And I'm like, oh shoot, this is like the app's down. So something's wrong. So I pick it up and I'm like, hey, this is Bruce from Printavo. How can I help? And, 30 minutes before this, I had interviewed a candidate for the startup, and I was just talking to him, and then, we hung up, and he's like, wait, what? And I was like, is this for Printavo? You have an issue? And he's like, no. This is like Nick. We just did the interview. And I was just like, oh shit.
Crossing the worlds. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was friends with the founder. And I was like, oh man, not a good look.
Yeah. So I think, just to answer the question about how I found Printavo, like I'm always digging for software. Like the software in this industry has been missing for a long time. I've got some theories and some thoughts about all that stuff, but like Printavo, I feel like when I first discovered it, I'm like, oh, this is like literally simple. It's like it does color and size right. You can put in some print information. It collects money really easy. It was just like a really, really simple solution versus all the other ones I was looking at were just getting too complex for their own good, right? Which just meant that it just wasn't usable, right? And so, and Bruce, I think you did a pretty good job of just like talking about things all the time, right? And I think a large similar way to I think Ryan at Ryanette did things, right? Is by being so actively vocal about what you were doing, it kind of led people like me that were just digging into some things. It gave me some resources to like dig, right? Versus some other software, it'll be like some stupid little 1 minute like whiteboard video that says what it should be doing, but not actually what it does.
For sure.
And I think that with your software, it was kind of the opposite.
Jeremy, you said you had some theories on why our industry is the way it is. I would love to talk about that for a second. What do you mean by that? Let's dig.
Well, so a quick little story of like, I come from the world of software, right? Like back in .com days. So like 1998, 99, right? I was in encryption, which is where my sort of education background was, right? And so I had a software startup in 99. After the .com crash, right? I went into teaching math. So I was a math teacher for a couple of years, which is when I kind of learned about screen printing. Just like I feel like a lot of people, like education and screen printing kind of go hand in hand, because you got students, you got sports teams, you got all these organizations that sort of need, something to wear and represent some pride. So I went into this screen printing world as a software person and an educator.
Because I saw the algebra teacher on your LinkedIn too. Is that how you then got into screen printing? Like, was it we needed some shirts or school spirit stuff or something?
Yeah.
Y equals MX plus B, Bruce.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Funny story. one of my earliest t-shirt designs, I was in AP Physics, and you got to use a cheat sheet. And
that's fucking genius.
So you got to use a cheat sheet for your exams. So the idea was, why don't we take the cheat sheet of formulas, right? F equals MA and all the crap they give you, and we would put it on the back of everyone's shirts.
Oh my god!
And then we had to use we had to use like
teachers
one of those smart physics. So we had like green check marks complete me, and so you would wear your shirt on test day, and the whole room would be wearing bright safety orange shirts. And I got to work with my physics teacher, Mr. Matt, on it. And
that's
Matt,
genius.
Yeah,
that is genius.
I don't know if I've ever told that story. I'm really excited about that.
That's something that will go viral.
Yeah, and it all comes down to like, how do you use these things, right? These T-shirts, the proverbial widget, right? And that's where I got really interested and curious about shirts. Was one, it was like how you use them, like that example, Stephen, that you just said is like, it's a way to some degree. It's like, not cheating the system. Like that's a way I probably would have used it. It's like, oh, we're not allowed cheat sheets, but here I'd print a T-shirt with all the formulas on it, and my teacher would be like, "Oh, you can't do that." I'm like, "But that's not a cheat sheet. It's just a T-shirt, right?" You find, exactly. You find like a little way to flip it, right? And for me, it was all about like I recognized like all the pride that I was able to like bestow upon kids, right? Where like the Black Student Union, they like never had T-shirts before, and all of a sudden, and I. Long story short, but I was the faculty advisor to the Black Student Union at the high school I was at. Because I was, the kids were like, Castro, you're the closest to a black person in our school, like teacher. And I'm like, it's a whole nother sort of topic in of itself. But the first thing I did was like, we got to get you guys T-shirts, right? So then when they're walking around campus, everybody knows that like the Black Student Union was like, it was a force on campus. And so one of the first shirts I did was for the Black Student Union. And I recognized the sense of pride that they got when they got to wear their shirts. Right. And like that was what hooked me. Right. And so kind of to get back into this like theory side of things, they asked me to go because I was working on an emergency credential. Right. So I wasn't a credentialed teacher. So I did 2.5 years of teaching before they're like, Jeremy, you have to go get your teaching credentials. And I'm like, nah, I think I'm going to go explore some other things. So I went to business school, and my goal was to like determine if this T-shirt thing was something that was a little bit bigger than just T-shirts, right? Like learn the industry and kind of dig into kind of the foundational side of this thing that I was like, man, I think I want to dedicate a long time to this. I want to make sure it's something that's got some, something to really grab onto besides just the act of printing shirts. So I kind of dug into it, and I was like, man, this is like a super fragmented industry, right? Meaning like, yeah, there's some big giants in this industry, but at the end of the day, it's so fragmented. And usually the sign when you see fragmented industries like that, it sort of says that like, well, there isn't like fragmented industries don't necessarily always attract like a lot of investors, right? Where they're like, oh, we're going to go in and we're going to get these 5 big customers and this and this. It's more like, oh, we got to go in and like find 1 million customers, which is pretty hard to do sometimes. Right. And so the fragmented side of it was really interesting to me because it was like, man, you can come in and make a real big impact in the competition. You're not like battling Goliath all the time. Right. Mm-hmm. So you could be a screen printer, come into the market, and you're battling the other small screen printers in your market. It's not
Bruce and I talk a lot about construction because we've had some really bad construction contractor experiences. And that's something we were texting about, right? Like Bruce, it was like, what if we just made like a slightly better, like customer service focused, like landscaping company, And I think it's a lot of it is like what you just said there is it's a fragmented and old industry, and there's not a lot of tech in it. And I think that's people don't actually, when they look at businesses before they start, do they actually sit and evaluate that? You might be one of the first people we've talked to on the podcast that does. Most people are like, I needed band merch, right? Yeah. That's interesting that you took like a scientific approach to it. So then did you get your MBA or were you in business school?
So So I did my MBA. I moved up to Vancouver, British Columbia. I went to University of British Columbia. Kind of wanted to go check Canada out and And so when I went and kind of like looked into it, I was like, oh man, this is an industry that would be really fun to get into because I think there's really ways you can make an impact. Right. And the way I sort of what I did, my first thing before I even got into real screen printing is I started a brand with my cousin. Right. He was like a big designer at Echo at the time and One Basketball. He was looking for a way to fully express himself without sort of the confines of working for another brand. Right. And so he pitched this idea of this like lifestyle basketball brand. And so him and I got together and we started a brand called Undercrown. And so we had, it was, from 2005 to 2010 when I was like fully immersed in it. And that was kind of like my first post NBA project where I kind of went in, not from a screen printer view, but more of like my cousin was a designer. He needed help building the infrastructure of, building a clothing line, which, he's since gone on to like crush things in so many ways. And so what I've done now with Brand Marinade was to come in and say, okay, now I want to take that infrastructure I built for the clothing brand and apply it and offer it to other people that are like 10 years ago. The idea of a brand was a lot different than it was 30 years ago, right? Like a brand was Nike. It was, these big established things. You put money into branding. Now it's like you could be a social influencer and you are a brand, right? And so the idea was to provide infrastructure to this new idea of what a brand was.
All right. So this is crazy. That I don't think I've heard that career trajectory. Softwareengineer.com crash, algebra teacher, business school, brand manager, now screen printer. All right.
Okay.
Did you buy a shop to get into it, or did you buy the equipment and scale in that way?
No. So my first machine, my uncle, he was an entrepreneur, did always had his hand in something. And when I was teaching, he was like, hey, Jeremy, you want the screen printing machine I have? And I'm like, ooh, of course I do. Right. And so I set it up in my parents' basement. I'm an old Victorian, and eventually I moved into a live-work warehouse space. So I had it in I lived with it. And this screen printing machine, it got its original start in a prison, in San Quentin prison, which is where it was initially used back in like the early 90s.
Or for through some like training?
Like a job training program.
We've sold to a couple prison job training. It's funny because we'll be at a trade show and then all of a sudden these police officers come up and you're like, and they're like, oh yeah, we have this job training thing. We're looking for some software to help teach business skills. Like, oh, okay, cool.
and I feel like that's like screen printing is, I think, a very, very, it could teach a lot of skills, right? And so it doesn't matter where you are or what time in your life, there's, and this kind of goes back to the education side of my life, right? It's like, oh, this is something you could teach anybody. And if you could teach them this, and that's where like I teach people customer service. Like, okay, guys, like we're managing these e-commerce sites. Let's teach you customer service skills because that's a skill that's transferable nowadays to anywhere because everywhere is online. Everywhere needs to use something like Zendesk as a customer service platform. And I feel like the screen printing in general is a great way where you get these people who maybe don't have a lot of skills and you could teach them a bunch of things that then become transferable to other industries or other jobs, right?
You know what? With that actually too, I'm kind of curious. And this just popped up. So sorry, I'm kind of interrupting on this. If you were to start again, obviously, family was like, okay, was a connection to get this press. If you were to start again, and this is for you too, Farrig, a lot of folks have said they either get started in their home and scale up and slowly ramp up, or they've bought some sort of small shop. Would you have gone back to buy a shop? Obviously, like one option has a lot less risk, right? Because you're starting small, you're able to see if you're even into it and be able to scale slowly into there. The other one, you may have a small team, right? That comes with the shop, maybe 4 or 5 people or something that can get you ramped up. A bit of a process, some customers maybe to start off with, a little bit more obviously expensive, but has more of a foundation. What would you have done going back? And then I'm curious on yours, Steven.
I think the way I did it was the only way I could do it for me.
Okay.
Like I I went into it because when I had my brand, I was like, we were like most of our money when I had this brand, we were doing a couple $1,000,000 a year in revenue.
Wow.
Like, I feel like
that's not a small
a third
brand.
of it was going.
That's not a small brand.
Yeah,
it's
it was.
hard.
We were in like 300 retailers around the U.S.
And
we
there
were
was no
crushing
social
things, right?
media. You were like, MySpace was just coming out.
Yeah, it was like
lookbooks.
Facebook was
Remember
just
last year
starting,
where brands
right?
had lookbooks. It was like
Yeah,
constantly
lookbooks.
sharing PDFs.
Yeah.
So you were
Yeah.
in 300 brick and mortar stores, boots on the ground, couple $1 million in sales. Keep going.
Yeah, and so a big chunk of our cost was going to our screen printers, right? And we were making some of our stuff. We were doing cut and sew stuff in Colombia, but our bread and butter was always the screen printed T-shirt or hoodie, like straight up. No matter every month, I'd write the check to the screen printer, and I was like, man, guys, we really need to do this in house. Like, we need to be printing our own shirts, right? And it wasn't because of the cost. Like, I wasn't really looking at cost savings or anything like that. I was looking more at like speed and agility, right? That was the area that I was the most focused on. And so when I built this shop, the Brand Marinade shop, my goal was how to create a shop with speed and agility in its foundation. So if I would have bought a shop, they would have been like, oh, well, this is how we do things. And I would have been sort of stuck with like the routine and the methodologies that they had, which necessarily weren't always built around speed and agility. So the shop that I was crafting was one where I wanted to make sure that I could do the things that as a brand I needed to get done, but screen printers hated doing.
On the buy or start from scratch, it sounds like start from scratch because you get to craft it as what you want, which makes total sense. Steven?
So I was 22 years old and I knew nothing about screen printing.
Totally.
And so I bought into a very small shop with really bad habits. And there were a lot of growing pains there, meaning like, to your point, Jeremy, I wanted to bring customer service, speed and agility, those kind of like 2020, principles. And I would always fight my old business partner on it. Be like, well, we've always done it this way. We've always done it this way. We've always done it this way. And so there were some really dark times where I didn't think it was going to work because there was like new age of thinking versus old age of thinking or old way of thinking. That being said, we bought him out. But for me though, I think the learning curve to get into printing, I don't think I had I probably would have gotten bored or found something else to do or like not given it everything. And so for me, I think it was best for my situation. And then, it was foundational because it was a little community print shop and there was something to at least jump off of. But I think to your point, you knew screen printing, you had a couple $1 million business already. You saw the inefficiencies in the market and you knew a ton about it. So now you can make, a pivotal move. I think it really matters. I don't know, Bruce, what do you think is better?
That's a really good point. There was a tweet that this guy runs a big tech company, but basically one of the things he was talking about M&A, just buying companies and for growth, right? So like how we interviewed some shops who would buy another company for sales and say we're going to bring along 50% of their sales or something and the rest will churn out. But they said that, the owner will help transition things, but he said remove them as quickly as possible. Because they're baked into their ways. They're probably more stubborn, right? Just like we are, with our business and how we think it should be run. So it's kind of interesting. And then culturally, for sure, other people are more malleable. And if not, then it's starting to get on the recruiting train. But it's just kind of interesting, right? Because it's like, can you buy back time versus getting a little bit further with something that has a little bit more process baked in, or for sure craft the kind of life you want. But I don't know. That was just kind of interesting. Wait, so you mentioned actually, you mentioned the Warriors. which I saw an article on your LinkedIn was talking about. I think it was 150,000 shirts, and
it was 150,000 prints, more likely, right? So
okay.
Probably 85,000, 90,000 shirts or something.
Did you have to do the neck tags?
No.
And what about the reflective sticker and?
No, yeah, we did. We had to do some of the reflective.
So, Jeremy,
stickers.
Was this hot market printing?
Yeah. It was, yeah. So there were two components. One was the in stadium freebie stadium shirts that they give for every home game, the ones they drape over the seats, and then there was the hot market stuff with Tegra and Nike. And that was stuff where like they're not the best jobs to do. It's like it's a grind, like a super duper grind, right? But for me, I'm like, okay, like this is a good test on speed and agility, like the super duper test on speed and agility. Because if the Warriors win, we have to figure out how to print 10,000 shirts in a day, right? Like you don't always have. You can't say you could do something sometimes until you actually do it, right?
So, and for scale, how big is your shop, Jeremy? How many autos?
2 autos.
Okay.
Yeah. So we got 2 autos. Yeah.
So you guys were up to the, that's insane. So, let me ask you this on the hot market side. So for those that don't know,
explain hot market and what that is.
Okay. So hot market, there are license holders that have the licenses to sell championship shirts, whether it's Final Four, NBA, whatever. And they go to various shops around the country where the market is hot. And they'll say, hey, if the Warriors win, we have a PO for 50,000 units, but this is how much you're going to make. This is how they have to be folded. And this is this production speed. And you don't really have too much of a say in it. We do it for Illinois because we're Illinois fans and we're in Champaign. We wouldn't hot market print for the Bulls because that's 2 hours away in Chicago, right? So there has to be a reason why you do it, which I think, Jeremy, you said would be a cool test. Now let me ask you this. What about the orders that were going straight to the Warriors? Were those less strict because they weren't, were giveaway shirts? Yeah,
they were also one color on gold shirt, like navy. They're black ink on gold shirts. So all day long. Right. And they were also, we usually had about 4 or 5 days to turn them around because it was all kind of predicated of how the playoffs were going, right? So there was sort of the hard deadline, fast turn. There was no folding, relationship. They were all extra larges.
Is that the relationship you had with the Warriors, or
no? It was through another. There's 10 layers of all this stuff all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so, what I think that to me the most interesting, then, just going back to this fragmented industry side of the game, right? Where the conversation was originally started. And you mentioned this, Stephen, about your old partner stuck in his old ways, bad habits, right? One of the other things that really interested me about this industry was, when it got kicking in the 70s, right? It was when screen printing shops sort of started showing their face, right? Because it became this thing that people were like, oh, printed shirts was this new thing. Well, a lot of those people that were running shops all started in the 70s and the 80s, which meant that, come in 2010 or 2020, these people are in their 70s, 60s, 70s, 80-year old people, which means they're not thinking about future technology. They're thinking about how do we keep this thing just purring along like it is with less headaches as possible. And I feel like the industry was filled with print shops that were owned by old people, and typically that means that's when I feel like innovation will start to dry up just a little bit because people are stuck in their habits and their old ways and the way they've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, right? And so going back to this Warriors thing and the hot market thing in particular, a lot of shops during COVID have shut down. And most of the shops shut down, I think, were the older shops that were run by sort of the previous generation of screen printers. And they're the ones that weren't necessarily ready for the shitstorm that was coming, right? With COVID and how reliant we were going to be on technology to do everything. And then they're also I'm ready to retire, right? I'm done. This is it. So what happened with this hot market thing, say the championship shirt specifically, a lot of the old school hot market printers weren't around anymore. So, they're calling their hot market oh shit, these people aren't here anymore. Because the last time the Warriors won, it was pre-pandemic.
Get a shot, you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So it opened up opportunities for somebody like me to get the call, and I've got a pretty good network of folks, right? Like that was one of the things that I came into this game with, was a really strong just network of people that I work with. And t-shirts to me was like, people come to me to solve problems with things, and t-shirts is one of the things that I was like, I need to make sure this is in my repertoire because people are asking for it. So I have to be able to make sure that I can do it. Right. That's kind of my philosophy on the services that I offer, is like, what do people ask me for?
What was it like? That getting that order, having, I mean, how many
Was that your
hours did
biggest
you
order?
just have? Yeah.
Is that your?
Not each one was only about 10 to 15,000 units, but there was like a lot of them. But when we looked at it, it was like, okay, we're going to stack, what do we do? 5 boxes of t-shirts on every cart. So it's like, okay, we have 1 cart. Let's start with that. 5 more boxes. And we had like 30 carts lined up. Right. And like, so like I looked at it just as like one little piece rather than like the biggest thing ever. And that just sort of made things more manageable.
Did
right?
you guys run 20 hours a day, 24 hours a day, 12 hours a day?
No, the only time we
hours.
did, we were doing basically 12-hour days. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was, I mean, it's exhausting because it's a marathon. But we were able to crank things out. And one of the keys was like, because we had to do sleeve prints, right? Like that was there was a front print and a sleeve print for the sponsor. We have one of those little rapid tag presses. And we were able to print the sleeves because, luckily it was a black print on a gold shirt. I think we were getting about 1,200 units an hour on that thing. Right. So he would go at it for like 5 hours straight and get like 6,000 shirts done, sleeves. And it was like, so we got to really like play around, I think, with something that we don't normally get to do, which is, it's a little bit of an experiment. It's like, okay, one is, how do we organize all the t-shirts? What kind of like workflow do we set up? And it's all about, quality obviously is the most important thing, but then the next one is like speed and efficiencies, right?
Is there any, what were any tips that you picked up on that you could share with somebody else who's, maybe picking up their first hot market job?
I'd say, so for the hot market, like the NBA championship stuff, which to me was like the most pride I've ever gotten out of a t-shirt, because these shirts keep giving. Like I just keep seeing images pop up, and one of my guys found a thread on Reddit that said, this year's championship shirts are like better than the years previous. And the shirts look so much better in real life, like talking about how nice the print was and stuff like that. Right. And I'm like,
this is literally the
that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. And we got to like print the Nike logo, which to me is like one of my sort of bucket list things, right? Which was pretty nice. But
you
I think
printed the Nike logo on what brand of shirt? Are you allowed to say?
It was a Nike shirt.
Okay,
like,
that's good.
Made by Gildan, I believe is where they're coming from. I mean, they make everybody's shirts probably. So the advice that I give, say with that project particular, because we didn't know how many we were going to print. We knew how many we were going to print. We just didn't know if it was going to happen. So the way that I organized everything, and I think the key to these kind of jobs is having a really good game plan going into it, because when you're talking about 10, 12,000 shirts and you got to turn them around in like, 24 hours or day and a half or something like that, you can't go into it and try to figure things out while you're in it, because the sheer volume of everything, you can't pivot very fast, right? Like if you go and you start stacking t-shirts and you're stacking them, face, with the front down versus the front up. And then you're like, you get to the press and like, oh, we're printing fronts, but they're the wrong way. And you got to figure out how to like either get somebody to flip all the stacks of shirts on the cart, or you have to like get the printer to adjust what they're doing. And when you're talking 10,000 units, like you can't go into it and make those adjustments, right? You have to go into it sort of knowing a good flow plan of everything that you're doing. And so that's where I spent a lot of my time beforehand, was creating a system, a labeling system of how we were going to organize things, having all of my different pods come in. And the Nike people, they were really, because I guess the way I solved the problem was different than the way most other people were solving the problem in the past. Meaning like the way I was organizing things. And the key with them is everything was on the, what do they call it? They called it a musical size run. And the musical size run was like 1 small, 2 mediums, 4 larges, 3 extra larges, 2 doubles.
To grab it.
So they're
like
retail
for,
ready.
Retail.
That was their ratio. So everything they did was in that ratio. And so one of the keys that I said was, well, if we're going to get into this long print job, I can't especially because they had trucks coming throughout the night to pick stuff up.
You want to be able to box them as they're coming off the press.
Yeah, exactly. And I couldn't be sitting there waiting for larges to come off the press. Right. And so what I did was I organized the 10,000 shirts we had into basically groups of, I don't know, it was like 600 or 700 units probably. And I broke up each group. So we had 10 different groups, or 12, I think it was. Each group had 1 box of small, 2 boxes of mediums, 4 boxes of large, 3.
Were there.
So it was the ratio. So at any given time, we had the correct ratio of completed product minus maybe whatever's still on the press. So that way I was never waiting for a specific size.
Do you think, right? Jeremy, it was so like a lot of people get wide eyes when they see these orders, and we've taken some good hot market, some bad ones. Is the money worth it? Because you're printing for pennies, right? Like, say what it is.
I haven't got paid yet, so
okay. So there's no profit. Okay, yeah, we need money down. That doesn't work in hot market printing. Welcome to the big leagues. Okay, so you don't get paid.
It's not
up
for
front.
The money. It's
not for the money.
I think for me it was being able to be tied to this current playoff run. So I'm doing it for some of these self gratification.
And you're in
right?
San Francisco,
because
you're
a fan.
Super pride.
Say what it is.
Yeah.
So like the TVs are on while you guys are printing, right? Like
yeah.
That's important. It does, like, we don't want to hot market print. We hot market for Illinois, and when they lost, they're like, "Hey, you want to print for Loyola?" We're like, "No, we don't want to do that." Like, they're like, "We'll ship you 4,000 maroon shirts." Like, no, we're good. There is something there about like that pride in your team.
Yeah, totally.
Do you think you could tell them, like, say, no, we'll do it and nail it just like we did last time now that you set this relationship up, but it's going to be X?
Probably. Like, I think I could have negotiated for a higher per piece price on this one, but I wasn't. Like, it was just as much of an experiment for me as anything, right? Yeah. So I didn't, which is the way I utilize this whole business has been a big experiment, right? Which is because I want to keep going back to this like industry fragmentation and all that kind of stuff, because I think that's, to me, just to bring sort of things full circle, is when I spoke to James about what, Printavo is like I just was behind on the industry news. And I was like, oh man, this is a sign that the fragmented industry that we're in is not going to be as fragmented as it used to be. Like with what happened with Inksoft and Printavo, right? This sort of acquisition, consolidation. And I was like, this is kind of what I've been waiting for the last 15, 20 years of printing, is I'm kind of been waiting for somebody to come in and recognize from a software perspective that this industry is something worth chasing. Because it's humongous, but the problem with the fragmentation of it is that it's hard to get all the customers and unify everybody, and there's no standardization. And when there's no standardization, that means that everybody's doing things their own way, right? And I think that what I'm so interested about what's going to happen with the Printavo future is like, okay, in theory, you guys have a bunch of resources now, right? And you're going to be able to start looking at innovation a little bit more focused, right? Like you probably have resources now where, when you were doing it by yourself and working another job, you can only do so much, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the way I'm looking at things now is that like, okay, some big money's gone into the industry from a software perspective, which means now standards can start to be created. I think that to me is the first move of creating a less fragmented industry, is by having good software that everybody's using that starts to standardize things, right? And then once this industry becomes less fragmented, we become more efficient, right? And efficiencies, then it's like, the competition changes a little bit too, because you're working on such a high level of service rather than trying to figure out all your processes and just get the print right, or get the colors right, or get the sizes right. You're more focused now on providing a service.
I would argue that that because the barrier of entry is low like anybody can go and buy equipment or spend 5K, and get started. And obviously that's a lot of money, but still that you can run a business and you can get pretty far off of that. That encourages people to come in and still keeps the fragmentation, as even if there's consolidation on the shops side, it creates vacuums and voids, just like being an algebra teacher and seeing the shirts and, oh, I can print it. All right, here you go. Here's your job. And then, you're able to sell in your community.
So Bruce, what you're saying is every day in printing, the barrier to entry is getting lower and lower, meaning 15 years ago, you had to buy a Riley 4x4, burn screens. Now you can get a heat press and Supacolor, right? So that's going to apply a lot of pressure to those that are already in the space to create some like defensibility, right?
I think there's a cap, but there's so much promotional products out there. But
what has to happen is the way you create like defensibility is by offering services that complement the product that you have that create those moats around it, like e-commerce, like being able to do what other people can't do, which is what technology is leveraging our industry to do. I read a quote on LinkedIn. It said, when you're trying to introduce disruptive technology into an industry, the number one competitor is the industry's unwillingness to change.
Interesting.
Right. And I thought it was interesting because like there's a lot of times, I don't feel like it happens as much, Bruce, but earlier on, like on trade show days, people were fighting us like hard. Like, why should I, do this? Why should I run online stores? Right. Like why that's not our bread and butter. Or why should I print with transfers? I'm a screen printing junkie. I love ink. Right. And I feel like we fight each other out of our unwillingness to change. And that, that hurts, right? I don't know.
I love that the barrier to entry is manageable, right? Because that's going to keep fresh people coming into this world, right? Now, the question though is when you outgrow the garage or basement shop, right, and become that next phase, right? Like it's going to be a matter, I think, of, okay, if you're just printing t-shirts, like that's one way to go. But I think, Stephen, what you're saying is that like, and this is the belief I have, is what new services can the screen printing, like people come in for t-shirts to me. Like I have a corporate account. They needed like, I was in Guam visiting my dad, where my dad's from, right, with the Pacific Islands. And it was 2018. My first vacation in a long time, was gone for like 3 weeks. Come back and I'm just digging through projects that got done while I was gone. I was like, ooh, who's this? Like, I've never heard of these people. And it was this bank that is now one of my biggest clients. And they needed like 24 t-shirts. I don't know, something tiny, right? And I kind of dug into it and I'm like, ooh, this is somebody that's interested. And I couldn't figure out where the lead came from. Then next thing you know, they said, hey, we have another project. Can we talk about it? And it turns out it was for vests, like Patagonia style, fleece vests for like 3,000 employees. And I'm like, call it an average of like $65 per unit or something like that, right? 3,000 employees. That's a huge job. And all of a sudden that one t-shirt, and then it became not just 3,000 employees, but I had to get the sweatshirts to all 3,000 employees because they were, all over the United States at different locations, not even on the remote side yet. Right. And so the services that I'm offering them now is like this combination of printing and embroidery, because I did acquire an embroidery shop. That's how I expanded into embroidery. Right. But now I'm doing data collection from them. I'm doing all their like retail printed materials and collateral. I'm doing all the fulfillment for the remote workers, keeping them like all the swag stuff that they need. And I think that what it means once I was able to focus less on like how to successfully print t-shirts, right? Which meant I needed a good process, some good software, a procurement process, good printers, all the things that kind of come with that. Then I was able to start focusing a little bit more on the different variety of services that we offer. And I think that that's kind of where I'm getting at with this consolidation that's going to start happening is in that world where services are going to start coming together.
You know what it is? There's a natural progression of a business that starts out, especially specifically a screen printing shop. You start small, you'll do any job for work at any price. You just want to get stuff in the door. You want to print, you want to make some money, and you're like, wow, I made, $500, $5,000. It's awesome, right? It feels really good. Then you grow, you start hiring people, your overhead gets higher, and you're like, wow, I was pricing these things in a way that doesn't make any sense. And I was probably hurting myself, but I was taking my competitor's price and just subtracting 5 cents. And then you raise your minimums up because everybody's like, you got to raise your minimums. Makes sense. So now you're at 12. Then you've got 10 people or something, and then you raise them to 50, right? And then you kind of sit there and you raise prices and you do more, right? And you become a bigger, you get an embroidery and screen printing and fulfillment and all this stuff, right? And you kind of hover in that area. But that seems to be the natural progression. And then as there's this gap here for the 0 to 50 orders, somebody else. It's like somebody crawls out of the crack, right? And
I
starts
think, Bruce,
doing it and spins up.
but you also, the part is other services, right? Like when you start to mature in your businesses, you figure out other ways to keep it afloat in case the shirts run out, right? So when you talk about it there, like Jeremy, like they're not going to leave you because you do their data collection, because you do their fulfillment, because you're shipping to everywhere across the United States. Like at Campus Ink, we have this thing, we say the t-shirt comes last. Everyone else can print a t-shirt. So let's think of everything else that a customer is going to need first. And the t-shirt comes last. If we do everything else, and that's how like we keep calling it moats. Like how do we build moats around our customers and clients and cement them in for life? Because that's what I'm scared of is who's going to be the, 25-year-old jackass Steven that wants to beat me in 5 years. Right. I don't know.
There was a guy that came in. I had like all this ink that when I acquired this embroidery shop, there was like 5-gallon drums of this old ink from like the 80s, right? Like, which is still actually most of it was still pretty good. But I put it on Craigslist and I'm like, hey, anybody that wants any, good plastisol inks, and some guy, one of his employees, a guy from San Mateo, like 45 minutes away, one of his employees came by, picked up some. And I started talking to him. Next thing you know, the owner of the screen printing shop comes by because he's like, hey, can I come and check out your shop? I'm like, yeah, come on in. Because I give tours to people, stuff like that. Excuse me. And so then he's like looking around. He's like, where do you get all your customers? He's like, I've been doing this for 30 years, and he's like, I can only get like the plumbers in the restaurant. He's like, how are you getting this big brand or this celebrity or this and this and this, right? And I feel like when Bruce, you're saying sort of this gap, right? Like being the garage shop to becoming the next big shop. It's not whether you could print t-shirts better, right? Because we can all like, there's a, one of my friends has a shop in his own garage and he prints like the best shirts I've ever seen, right? Like they're just beautiful, but he doesn't want to do anything more than that. He does his own stuff, right? But to me, the next phase of like, how do you be, that new person that comes into the market in their garage or whatever, their small little shop, it's really now a matter of like, can you find the people to print shirts for? Like, just because you can get into the market doesn't mean you're going to be able to service the market, right? And I think that's where I think this, like, to me, this next phase of the game of where the industry is going is it is going to be the people that are thinking about innovating, that aren't just like, oh, I want to print t-shirts. It's more like, oh, I want to service this interesting like need that's out there. And then also trying to think about what the need is going to be in 5 years, not just what people need today. Right. And I think that just going back to the software side, by creating standards and having a software platform that's going to allow us to just get the shirts printed, right, and manage that process effectively, then we could start thinking about the other things, right? Like kind of like the hierarchy of needs, right? Like most shops are like struggling with like, okay, how do I get an invoice that makes sense? Because if I'm doing it in QuickBooks and I have to do like all my line item this, or maybe I just say t-shirts and 200, right? And they're like $6 a piece versus t-shirts, it's, whatever, all style 1301 black. And you list all the print colors, locations, and, all the details of that shirt. And then you say, I want 20 smalls, 20 mediums, like that invoice versus the other invoice, right? The QuickBooks version, right? And think about all the data that is in each one. And if you're doing the QuickBooks version of it and you don't have any data in there, there's no way you're going to be able to scale your service, right? Software is there's always going to be room for the next person to come in, right? Which is what I like about the industry, because it's going to keep it super innovative. The more people you have coming in, the more fresh blood comes in. Like you just said that, Stephen, you said the next 22-year-old version that wants to be what you and what you're doing, they're going to come in and be like, why is everybody doing it like this? Oh, there's got to be a better way. Right. And but that's going to lead to is essentially what I think is going to lead to innovative ways of solving the same problems. Right. And that's what I get super excited about, because there was so much room to innovate in this industry. Right. But it took, I have an M&R machine, but I think to me, the Rock is like the most innovative of the machines, right? We could play that whole game, but
Jeremy, when I'm next time I'm in Bay Area, I got you on my list to hit up. It'd be cool to do a shop tour.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been a dope episode, though. Thanks for sharing the background and everything. Everybody, this is Jeremy Castro. You can find him at Brand Marinade, of which I really like brandmarinade.com. So check that out too. I think it's really well laid out website. But appreciate everybody listening to the Printavo Print Hustles podcast. We'll see you guys in the next episode.